Part 4. Turning the Tide. Robben Island, Cape Town Province, United States of Southern Africa. Solelwa Azania greets me at his writing desk, inviting me to switch places with him so I can enjoy the cool breeze blowing from his window. He apologizes for the mess and insists on clearing the notes off his desk before we continue. Mr. Azania is halfway through his third volume of Rainbow Fist, South Africa at War. This volume happens to be about the subject we are discussing, the turning point against the living dead, the moment when his country pulled itself back from the brink.
Dispassionate, a rather mundane word to describe one of history's most controversial figures. Some revere him as a savior, some revile him as a monster. But if you ever met Paul Redicker, ever discussed his views of the world and the problems, or more importantly, the solutions to the problems that plague the world, probably the one word that would always cling to your impression of the man is dispassionate. Paul always believed, well, perhaps not always, but at least in his adult life, that humanity's one fundamental flaw was emotion. He used to say that the heart should only exist to pump blood to the brain, that anything else was a waste of time and energy. His papers from university, all dealing with alternate solutions to historical and societal quandaries, were what first brought him to the attention of the apartheid government. Many psychobiographers had tried to label him a racist, but in his own words, racism is a regrettable byproduct of irrational emotion. Others have argued that in order for a racist to hate one group, he must at least love another. Redicker believed both love and hate to be irrelevant. To him, they were impediments of the human condition. And, in his words again, imagine what could be accomplished if the human race would only shed its humanity. Evil. Most would call it that, while others, particularly that small cadre in the center of Pretoria's power, believed it to be an invaluable source of liberated intellect. It was the early 1980s, a critical time for the apartheid government. The country was resting on a bed of nails. You had the ANC, you had the Inkatha Freedom Party, you even had the extremist right-wing elements of the Afrikaner population that would have liked nothing better than open revolt in order to bring about a complete racial showdown. On her border, South Africa faced nothing but hostile nations, and, in the case of Angola, a Soviet-backed Cuban spearheaded civil war. Add to this mixture a growing isolation from the Western democracies, which included a critical arms embargo. And it was no surprise that a last-ditch fight for survival was never far from Pretoria's mind. This is why they enlisted the aid of Mr. Redicker to revise the government's ultra-secret Plan Orange. Orange had been in existence since the apartheid government first came to power in 1948. It was the doomsday scenario for the country's white minority, the plan to deal with an all-out uprising of its indigenous African population. Over the years, it had been updated with the changing strategic outlook of the region. Every decade, that situation grew more and more grim. With multiplying independence of her neighbor states and multiplying voices for freedom from the majority of our own people, those in Pretoria realized that a full-blown confrontation might not just mean the end of the Afrikaner government, but the Afrikaners themselves. This is where Redicker stepped in. His revised Plan Orange, appropriately completed in 1984, was the ultimate survival strategy for the Afrikaner people. No variable was ignored. Population figures, terrain, resources, logistics. Redicker not only updated the plan to include both Cuba's chemical weapons and his own country's nuclear option, but also, and this is what made Orange 84 so historic, the determination of which Afrikaners would be saved and which had to be sacrificed.
Sacrificed?
Red Decker believed that to try and protect everyone would stretch the government's resources to the breaking point, thus dooming the entire population. He compared it to survivors from a sinking ship capsizing a lifeboat that simply did not have room for them all. Red Decker had even gone so far as to calculate who should be brought aboard. He included income, IQ, fertility, an entire checklist of desirable qualities, including the subject's location to a potential crisis zone. The first casualty of the conflict must be our own sentimentality, was the closing statement for his proposal. For its survival will mean our destruction. Orange 84 was a brilliant plan. It was clear, logical, efficient, and it made Paul Red Decker one of the most hated men in South Africa. His first enemies were some of the more radical, fundamentalist Afrikaners, the racial ideologues, and the ultra-religious. Later, after the fall of apartheid, his name began circulating among the general population. Of course, he was invited to appear before the Truth and Reconciliation hearings, and of course, he refused. "I won't pretend to have a heart simply to save my skin," he stated publicly, adding, "No matter what I do, I am sure they will come for me anyway." And they did, although it probably was not in the manner Red Decker could have expected. It was during our Great Panic, which began several weeks before yours. Red Decker was holed up in the Drakensberg cabin he had bought with the accumulated profits of a business consultant. He liked business, you know. One goal, no soul, he used to say. He wasn't surprised when the door blew off its hinges and agents of the National Intelligence Agency rushed in. They confirmed his name, his identity, his past actions. They asked him point blank if he had been the author of Orange 84. He answered, without emotion, naturally. He suspected and accepted this intrusion as a last-minute revenge killing. The world was going to hell anyway. Why not take a few apartheid devils down first? What he could never have predicted was the sudden lowering of their firearms and the removal of the gas masks of the NIA agents. They were of all colors, black, Asian, colored, and even a white man, a tall Afrikaner who stepped forward and without identifying his name or rank, asked abruptly, "You've got a plan for this, man, don't you?" Red Decker had indeed been working on his own solution to the undead epidemic. What else could he do in this isolated hideaway? It had been an intellectual exercise. He never believed anyone would be left to read it. It had no name, as explained later, because names only exist to distinguish one from others, and until that moment, there had been no other plan like his. Once again, Red Decker had taken everything into account. Not only the strategic situation of the country, but also the physiology, behavior, and comeback doctrine of the living dead. While you can research the details of the Red Decker plan in any public library around the world, here are some of the fundamental keys.